All right, everyone. Today I've got my friend Vernon Ross joining me on the Biz Grind YouTube show. Vernon, what's going on, man?
What's up, man? How you doing?
Hey, not too bad. It's been a while. I know that we haven't been distant because we do chat on the socials.
Right, but, on the social medias.
Yes, on the social medias, right.
Yeah.
So, but it's been a while. I think I interviewed you for my audio podcast a long time ago. It's probably
that was ages, man. Right?
Yeah, it was ages ago, wasn't it? Well, let's start off and tell people, who's Vernon Ross, what's your mantra, tell the YouTube world and the stratosphere, what's Vernon doing currently?
All right, so I'm knocking my microphone over, apparently. It's like, too
much coffee?
So, right, oh, Jesus Christ, man. Big, huge cup of coffee. Now I'm on the water on my Coca-Cola bottle. But,
okay.
So, it's interesting. Over the past couple years, first off, are you hearing this fan noise at all?
Maybe.
My Mac is apparently on its last leg, and so the fan is just like going, and I don't want it to mess up this recording at all.
No, I think it should be okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Oh, okay. Ooh.
Video still good? Okay, good.
Yeah, video's still good, so we're still good. Yeah, I don't hear it was actually my MacBook that was humming, but I think it's because I had another application running on the background, but you're good. So go ahead.
Good. So over the past couple of years, it's been real busy. Trying to get this whole, social media sort of firm off the ground. I had a huge switch probably about, I think, 3 years ago. I was doing a lot of PR stuff, writing press releases, the boring stuff that goes with PR, trying to get people booked for stuff, not really stuff that I enjoy. So I kind of broke away from that, got heavily involved in social media and talking about social media. And because I was working with a few clients that were, quite honestly, just not listening to what I had to say.
Right.
And quoting experts, I decided to launch a podcast back in 2013, and that's kind of how I got into the whole podcasting thing, and that morphed into basically me increasing my knowledge with podcasting and becoming more of an expert in the although I hate to use that word, but becoming more knowledgeable in the field of podcasting and helping other podcasters develop their shows. The show took off really well, was successful, and through the series of guests and appearances at conferences and stuff like that, I ended up getting to the point of where I've written this book.
Right, and that's what I'm pretty excited to talk to you about.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. All of this came together because of podcasting and my involvement in podcasting and all of the things that it's done for me over the past 3 years. So my mantra right now, share your message, find your voice, whether that's through podcasting, video, whatever, but too many people have things to say that they're not saying, and I want to help people do that.
Sure. All right, and before we dive into the book, first and foremost, you got to throw in a plug here. So you were talking about an audio podcast. Throwing the plug. This is the time to insert the plug.
Right? So my podcast is called the Social Strategy Podcast. I talk about social media, strategy, online business, and networking.
Yeah. And you know what is the reason I really emphasize that is because I think it's important for viewers to recognize that it's not just any audio podcast. I mean, I think at one time you caught up with Gary Vee while he was in between airports and got to chat with him, and that's definitely recognizable. And I think it was important to emphasize that because anytime you have an industry expert, and he's really an influencer too, and you have the ability to draw their attention. It's definitely something to recognize. It's a milestone, so to speak, and you've definitely had some, reputable guests on your podcast too, right?
Oh, yeah. So, the funny thing about Gary is that interview really changed the trajectory of the podcast.
Sure.
It was already doing well, but because he did the interview and some of the things that he said during the interview, it got a lot more attention and actually earned me a lot more business because he was like, "Oh yeah, you respected my time. I appreciate it, and that's why I'm glad I passed up the Wall Street Journal to do your podcast." And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, yeah, they just called me right before I called you, and they wanted to do a interview for an article, and I turned them down because we had this call. And I'm just like,
yeah,
okay. And people hear that, and they're like, whoa, wait a minute, maybe I should be paying attention to you. So it's that whole thing of borrowed influence that you get from when you have on really great guests. Yeah. And you actually give them the attention and the time, and you know about their background and what messages are important to them. So I think that's the thing that a lot of podcasters miss. It's like, what's the message that's important to your guests past their products or whatever it is they're selling?
Yeah.
What is they're trying to communicate? And we talked about Instagram before he got crazy engaged on Instagram. When he was still talking about Snapchat, we were talking about Instagram.
Yeah, interesting. So you made a very interesting point is about Gary Vee, and the reason I brought that up is because Gary was actually, he just spoke here in St. Louis about a day or two ago. And he happened to visit Sugar Fire Smokehouse, which, is everybody's actually talking about Sugar Fire because I think, as a matter of fact, I actually had Sugar Fire for dinner last night, and I realized up in their window they had some decals that talked about as seen on Beat Bobby Flay. So the whole controversy now is Mike, who's the owner of Sugar Fire, is up against Bobby Flay to prove that he has the best barbecue, basically, authentic cuisine. So when Gary was here a couple of days ago, and I was actually catching up on the Daily V show, hence why I asked you about Gary V and your podcast, is, one of the things that you mentioned is that from what I've heard from everybody is that he's a very down-to-earth type of individual, that he shakes hands, he takes the time, and I think that's what successful people do. They recognize and they acknowledge, no matter if you're, and someone who, Gary's a business mogul with a net worth of $200-300 million. He doesn't need to be on the phone with, Vernon Ross, but he takes the time to be on the phone with Vernon Ross because he recognizes the value. He recognizes and appreciates the time that you've set aside, the interest, the will. So that's why I asked you, because, anytime you get the attention of someone like that, it just goes to show that they're very dedicated, and successful people usually are. They'll find time out of their day to go great lengths if they need to. And they don't have to, it's just how they're wired. So, and so I just wanted to make that comment about Gary, because what's really interesting is just that, the fact that you were able to get Gary on the phone is a lot of people would question that and say, well, Vernon, how were you able? Did you go through his assistant? Or, they question the process. And I think a lot of marketers and entrepreneurs nowadays, I think they question so much rather than do more action and execute more. It's like, you made a comment before we kicked off the interview, about some of the guests that I did on my audio podcast. Like Elena Cardone was one of the last guests. And to be honest with you, there's this thing called Twitter. I'm sure you're part of it, right? There's this thing called social media, which, is a buzz for many, right? Yeah. And and the reality of things is I literally just went out to Twitter and tweeted out at Elena. Next thing you know, she gives me her email address. She says, hey, just email me. And, it did take a week and a half to pinpoint her down. But, this is someone that, is moving at 1 million miles per hour. So the fact that she even answered my email was just mind-boggling, honestly. But to your point is this, that you can do anything as long as you set your mind to it, which really kind of segues into, your book, Master Your Message, right? That's the name of the book. Is that correct?
That is correct. It is, I have my video reduced, so I can't see what I'm doing. So it's called Master Your Message, the guide to finding your voice in any situation. The forward there is more important as far as I'm concerned. It's by Kim Garst.
Okay.
That was a huge win.
Yeah.
The thing about the book, it's written like a guide. So it's a little small book. It's only an 82-minute read, so you can get through it in a couple hours or a weekend. But you can jump into it at any point in time, in any chapter, read it, and the chapter stands on its own. It's written kind of like a bunch of blog posts, but I don't want people to think that it's just a bunch of blog posts from my blog. It's just a collection of stories.
Sure.
I've got 3 people who were significant to me that contributed to the book. On top of Kim Garst writing the right in the forest. She's from Social Boom. People maybe know her more from there. Social media influencer, huge, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram influencer. I've got Patrice Washington. She's the financial voice for the Steve Harvey Morning Show. She was a guest on my show several times. Would break things on my show before she would announce them anywhere else, just because we were friends, and I met her at a conference and developed a friendship. Chris Brogan contributed to the book. I know he was just a guest on the podcast not too long ago.
Yeah.
And it was simply an email to Chris after a few meetings, and we had him here in St. Louis to speak at the Midwest Digital Marketing Conference a couple years ago. So I've developed a really good relationship with him. It was literally just an email. I was like, hey, Chris, would you like to contribute a story to my book?
Sure.
He's going, sure, man, anything I can do to help you out. It was literally just one email, and then a few follow-up emails because I couldn't get them to get things done. But and then another guy from the UK that was just really key in helping me actually get the book written. He's an author, and in one of my mini author meltdowns, he was like, he talked me down off the ledge. He's like, yeah, now you're a writer, that you've finally had that.
Right.
Just you think that you can't, that you're stupid and you can't write, and the whole thing is crap, and you've thrown it out. Now you're a writer. Now you can calm down, and things will start getting done.
Well, so one interesting point you made, and before I lose my train of thought on that, is you talked about how compact the book is, and what's I think extremely important about that is the whole book writing trend, and I really shouldn't label it that way, but no pun intended there by any means, but I think there's a lot of books out there right now, right? Marketers, entrepreneurs, business owners, but I think the beauty about what you've published is that it's compact, and therefore you can breeze through it rather quickly. You know, and I think that, in looking at size and depth of most books, is just that, some of the bigger books, it might take you a little bit more time. So, you need to dedicate more time to actually reading that so you can pay attention to the information, actually let it really simmer in, right? So, with that being said, I think that's the beauty of it. Oh, yeah. Tools of Titans, right?
Yeah, Tools for Titans, my book.
Right. Right. That looks like a peon right there.
Right.
Compared to Tim Ferriss's book, which, by the way, is another great book, too. Another one actually on my list. But, okay, let's dive into the book itself.
Sure.
Tell us, the book. What inspired you to write the book? I mean, you got up one morning and decided to write a book, or has this been a mission?
I've been wanting to do this for years, and I've started several times and failed at it several times. Last year, was it last year? No, 2 years ago, we went to Hawaii for a family vacation. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to write on this vacation. Had this brilliant idea I'm going to write. So I took a journal. I'm just going. I like to handwrite when I first start writing to kind of get the ideas out there and put all this stuff down. About 3,000 words that I wrote in this journal, like hand wrote in this journal. And then I went back and read it and was like, crap, this is shit. And it really was. It was horrible. And I'm like, it was a bunch of just random thoughts, which is, that's how I work, but it wasn't anything even like a first draft. And I thought that I was really like well on my way to getting a book written. And, I tried several times. I wrote a little ebook that I mostly edited public rights content and just kind of put my own spin on it. And that was horrible, and I didn't really like it. So it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I had a book coach on my podcast. She followed me on Twitter, lady named Morgan Geist McDonald from Paper Raven Books. Followed me. I was like, oh, who's this? Because I still vet most of my Twitter followers. I looked at her site. I'm like, oh, a book editor. That's interesting. Let me get her on the show. So I sent her an email. She was on the show. And we started talking about the writing process and me failing at writing this book. And she was like, oh, okay, I'm going to follow up with you. I just figured she was saying it for the podcast. She actually followed up with me a couple weeks later. And she kept following up with me. And finally, when she created a group coaching program, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to hire Morgan as my book coach, get this thing done, set a goal, and then publicly announced on Facebook that I was writing a book and had hired a book coach. So I actually had to get it done.
Oh, okay.
About 2 months past my actual completion date that I was supposed to be completed, another of the relationships that I formed because of podcasting told her that, oh yeah, I'm writing this book. Did you see the Facebook post? She goes, oh yeah, I did see that. So where's it at? And I'm like, I'm not done. She's like, oh, you need to meet this guy. She introduced me to a guy named Nick Palvitas. He happened to ghostwrite for Morgan James Publishing, and knew one of the acquisitions editors. Introduced me to her. She wanted to see what I had. I sent it to her, and then we just kind of went back and forth. About 48 hours after meeting her, basically she was pitching my book to their publishing board, and they were going to review it to see if they wanted to publish it. A couple weeks later, I heard back, and was like, okay, you need to go ahead and finish your book. So
yeah.
I struggled to get to 20,000 plus pages, and so that's about what it is. About 120 pages long now, but it's really interesting when you start going through the whole book writing process and the stuff that you come up with, and just the stuff that you touch on. I talked briefly about social media, which is funny. It's one little chapter. It's about 4 pages, but I talk to people about what I think is wrong with social media, what I think you should do when you're using social media.
Sure.
Reaching out to people that you find interesting. Talk to those people about the things that they're actually doing, things that people aren't doing on social media right now. I think people are using social media just as a tactic, and I'm tired of people using other people as tactics. That's not really, well, relationships. That's really what the book is about. It's about stories and relationships and weird things that I've had to struggle with.
One of the things that really drew my attention towards your book is just that, mastering your message, when in essence is, I was thinking of communication, basically. But communication, I think, is such a broad term that was, I think, really mainly utilized in the PR world. But I think that, to your point, is mastering your messages, is that message in the sense of how to be more communicative, and you have, a chapter, 4 pages on social media. So, it's definitely applicable to that, because I think one of the things that especially marketers and a lot of businesses, even a lot of successful companies are doing with social media is exactly what you said, is just a tactic, is that they're failing to recognize the importance of a precise message, a tactical message, or really the communication behind it. So and that's what I wanted to ask you is tell us a little bit about give us a glimpse, don't give away the whole 9 yards, give us a glimpse about give us a little bit of a teaser about so mastering your message is what are some avenues, or what are some tactics, or what are some recommendations that you're sharing in your book that other companies and other entrepreneurs, marketers can use to master their message.
Right. Well, if you just look at the chapters, and I should have sent you a copy before. I actually right before the interview, the UPS guy dropped off the first case of books because it's not out yet. So we're still in pre-release mode. It comes out in June, but one of the second chapter is talking about is get your mind right. And I actually got that from Grant Cardone in one of his books. He's like, you got to get your mind right. You got to get your mind right. His voice, and he's doing that whole thing. But I think that's one of the first things that companies need to do. You have to get your mind wrapped around, what is it that's really important to me, and what is it that I'm actually trying to say. And whether that's a salesperson that's talking about the product that they're selling, whether that's a company talking about their brand, you have to get on the page of, this is why this brand is important, and this is actually what I'm trying to achieve, and this is how I'm trying to help people. And unfortunately, a lot of companies, they just get into, how can I sell it, without understanding what it is that they're actually trying to do, the outcome that the consumer wants. They're not thinking about, how do I help this person get to the outcome, whether that's just being happy with their purchase or, whether that's evangelizing their brand. They're not thinking about that. And that's kind of what you'll find as far as the book is concerned. It talks about that stuff more on a personal basis, but you can apply a lot of the information that's in here, to your brand. Like one of the chapters is, why I resisted the niche. I hate the whole, niche down till it hurts bullshit that you hear the marketer saying, "Oh, you got to niche down." Right.
It's the marketing lingo that every marketer is using.
Right. Oh, niche down. I'm like, what if I'm good at multiple things?
Right.
Right.
Well, interesting point is this. So niche, which I'm going to side a little bit because you made a very interesting point on that. But talking about mastering your message and the communication aspect is, I think it's extremely important because one of the things that you mentioned personal. So your book gets personal, and I think that's extremely important because I think where we're at today in terms of the digital marketplace, because the reality of things is we live in a digital world and companies are forced to embrace that digital world or they're quickly becoming irrelevant, right?
Absolutely.
Consumers, us as humans, we seek a personal experience. Whether it's with a brand, whether it's B2B or B2C, we're still seeking that personal experience. So I think in mastering your messages, from what I'm hearing, I love to check out the book too, is to read more about it, is that, if you get personal, you're satisfying the need of that consumer. At least that's kind of the trend that has developed, and I think it has been indicative too of, seeing what some companies like Macy's, for instance. I think a few weeks ago they made an announcement that they're closing down like 68 stores because they're really focusing on digital. When you look at it as, digital really as a channel, there's so many things that happen in that realm, but communication is really at the epicenter of it, is a message. Every brand has a message that they share with their buyers, with their buyer personas, right? And the way that they share that message, I think, totally cross-pollinates with your book, is how do you master that message, and what steps do you need to take to master that message? Is there a key terminology, key jargon? Is it a personal experience? Is it a specific experience? And you made a very, very good point about the personalization aspect, which I think is huge nowadays because just even going into a local retail store or even going to Froyo, it's just, you experience that personalized approach, right? Because a lot of companies have finally understood that the way they marketed, 50 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago even, is significantly different than what it is today. So, and messaging is really, a key component to that, because if messaging is not succinct, at least from things that I've experienced, if messaging is not succinct, then it can create a lot of misconceptions, particularly, especially from an expectation standpoint, because the reality of things is, as consumers, we all have expectations. Whether it is we're buying a product or a service, we have an expectation of some sort. Whether it's a realistic expectation, now, of course, that's a different story. But point being is, I think that's where messaging goes into it. So, that's interesting that you made that comment, and I had no idea you were in pre-release.
It's funny.
Yeah, I had no idea that you were in pre-release. And by the way, I would love to get a copy of the book. As a matter of fact, I would love to give it away to in a contest also.
I'll give you a couple copies to give away, actually.
Very cool. Very cool. I would appreciate that, because I think that, and again, without kind of going into a tangent, share a little bit more about, so mastering your message, give us a little bit more glimpse into what are some of the highlights, what are some of the things that you noticed that pushed you towards writing this book. Also, obviously, you saw a necessity in the marketplace, but what were some of those necessities?
Intentional conversations, which is actually one of the chapters. I just read John C. Maxwell's Intentional Living, and what I was starting to notice, especially in social media and at events, is that there was too much of this and not enough of put your phone in your back pocket and actually have a conversation with the person that's in front of you. And so I talk about having intentional conversations, whether they be, with the person that you're in the room with, whether they be with your kid, whether they be with somebody on social media. Put your phone down for a little bit and actually focus on the person and focus on that conversation. Because what it shows that person is that you care enough about them to pay attention to them. And I think there's a lack of that right now. In general, there's a lack of that. And unfortunately, I was actually doing a little bit of it while we were talking, because I'm like, let me thumb through here and make sure I pull out something.
Well, you made a very interesting point.
That's horrible.
about the intentional conversations. And what's so ironic is it was a couple of days ago, I saw an article on my Facebook feed. There was something along the lines of, it was a picture of a couple laying on the bed, and what you usually would see in their hand their smartphones is, so it was an indication to portray how boring, how, well, I shouldn't say really boring, but I guess boring is probably a good word to use, how boring our lives really were in essence, or as humans how we envision that when you take away technology and smartphones. Because I think what technology and smartphones have done is that have immersed us into the matrix, so to speak, right? Is this that we're all plugged into this matrix, this virtual world, and when we disconnect now, we literally feel like we've disconnected from reality, when in fact our reality, our former reality, is where we need to be coming back to. Because again, to your point, is intentional conversations. I mean, look at what teenagers are doing nowadays, right? They're spending time on their mobile phones because that is their platform to communicate with their peers, their friends, right? Now, if you took away that device, then how is that intentional conversation coming in, right? And I think that's a really interesting point, is that, and I think this really kind of cross-pollinates to the family aspect too, is that, telling your kids, me and you both have kids. My son is a lot younger than your kids, obviously, but the point is that the way they communicate, those intentional conversations are intricate because it personalizes the experience, Right. You need to have that face-to-face interaction, which I think is irreplaceable to this day. No matter what kind of technology comes about, I think the face-to-face, the intentional conversations that you mentioned are extremely important. So, what are some ways that I guess companies, let's look at this from a business standpoint, right? Yeah. To have those intentional conversations. So, companies market on a digital channel, on digital platform, really, whether it's social or whether it's search or it's content, but what suggestions would you give to companies, in terms of the intentional conversation? How can they invoke those intentional conversations?
Well, by paying attention to what people are actually requesting, what they're asking online, what they're asking in surveys, and actually have the ability for people to leave you that feedback. What you'll see a lot of the times is that companies they'll have an online presence, but no way to contact them. Or, when you do contact them, you never hear back. Or, the companies that aren't responsive on Twitter or Facebook, they have those presences, but they don't actually respond to consumers. So they have no real way to communicate what their brand message is, because the brand message doesn't happen when you sell the product. The brand message actually happens when you take care of the problems.
Right.
So that Nordstrom's is a great brand, but you only hear about the extraordinary things that they do to solve problems, like when the little kid's stuffed animal got left at a what hotel was it? Was it it was the Ritz-Carlton. Like the Ritz-Carlton, everybody knows, okay, yeah, that's a really fancy hotel, but they know that they'll go the extra mile because they did all of this stuff with this kid who, lost his stuffed animal.
Right.
They took the stuffed animal to the spa. They took pictures with the stuffed animal. They just told the kid that the stuffed animal was on an extended vacation.
Right.
It was a wonderful story. It was, and most people know it, and it says, wow, if I go there, not only am I going to be treated like that, but they'll treat my kids like that. And that's what really communicates a brand story. That's how you find your brand's voice. Their brand's voice is, kindness, compassion, and caring for their guest past, oh, you just spent, 4 days with us and $1,000. Thanks a lot. See you later. Please come back again. It's, hey, we want your experience to carry on past just staying here. So I think that's where brands can use Master Your Message to try to at least help the individual person that's within that company understand what their voice is and how to communicate that brand's message.
That was a really interesting point that you were talking about the lost animal, because that creates a personification of a projected expectation. So, you were saying like staying at the hotel, so that's really, really interesting, because it gives a glimpse into consumers, the kind of experience that they can have with that brand.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, I think in part what they've done is mastered that message. So they took that stuffed animal and they went to great lengths, and then they crafted a custom message to communicate with the little kid, right? And and showcase. But not only that, but they weren't really necessarily appealing. I mean, they were appealing to them, but then they were appealing to their parents because the parents are seeing that and they're saying, "Oh, okay, well, I'm going to go to Ritz-Carlton because guess what? You know, I'm going to be pampered, or based on you know the experience that they projected or the personification they created is I can expect to be pampered. Why wouldn't you, right? Because it gives you a glimpse into a projected experience. And again, I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is that I think consumers nowadays more than ever are seeking an experience with everything, with every product, with every service, with every brand, with every company, you know. And I think it's also presented a challenge for a lot of companies as well. The way they create those expectations, the way they lure in consumers also by, and I'm going to go a little bit to the jab, right hook, is, you know, giving a lot of added value up front. And that's what I think the Ritz-Carlton kind of did, is this, that they crafted this custom message that appealed to the little kid, knowing that they were actually appealing to his or her parents, you know, knowing that those were potential customers.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's a really interesting way. So, you know, you share a lot of good tips about the book, and thank you so much for, you know, diving into that. It sounds like this is definitely a book everyone needs to have on their shelf. Every marketer, every business owner, and again, is I think what makes it so unique and distinct is because it has a unique message. And some of the things that you already mentioned. So, with that being said, Vernon, you know, thanks so much for joining me and jamming with me here about the book. I mean,
it's been fun.
I had so much fun doing that. You know, how can people connect with you on the interwebs if they want to learn more about the book and, you know, chat with you?
Yeah, definitely. You can find me VernonRoss.com. That's the easiest way to get in contact with me. But of course, I'm at RossPR on Twitter, Instagram, and also Snapchat.
Okay. So all over the radar. All right.
All over the radar. You can pretty much find me anywhere. I got a YouTube channel out there that I need to do more with, but yeah, you can pretty much find me anywhere.
Right. Very cool. Well, Vernon, thanks so much for jamming with me, man. Really interesting about the book, and look forward to the official release.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's coming out June 19th is the official release, but I've got several copies here that I'm doing some pre-order fulfillment with, and of course you can order it on Amazon. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. It's pretty much available everywhere.
Okay, very cool.